Should a machine ever have the power to decide who lives and who dies? Before we dive into the evidence, drop down into the comments and let us know, where do you draw the line on artificial intelligence in matters of life and death? Welcome to the debate. Today we are unpacking, one of the most consequential questions of our time, really. We're looking at whether artificial intelligence should be strictly prohibited from making life or death decisions across military, judicial, and medical contexts, or whether it can be safely and ethically integrated through robust systemic oversight. Right. And this conversation emerges from a pretty massive wealth of recent source materials that highlight the stakes. We will be drawing on the UC Merced study on automation bias, the Future of Life Institute's open letter on autonomous weapons, United Nations reports on lethal autonomous weapon systems, or laws, and academic frameworks evaluating AI in criminal sentencing and end-of-life palliative care.
Exactly. And my position today is that when integrated into a political framework of distributed institutional responsibility, AI's unparalleled processing speed and precision can be safely utilized in high-stakes environments to minimize harm.
Then I argue that AI should never be allowed to make life or death decisions. The inescapable realities of digital dehumanization, the absence of moral reasoning, and our innate psychological tendency to blindly trust machines mean that crossing this line is just a mistake we can't walk back. To really grasp why I think integration is not just possible, but fundamentally necessary, we have to look at the sheer scale and complexity of the environments we're operating in today. The modern arenas where life and death decisions are made, whether that is a chaotic battlefield, a severely overburdened medical system, or a stressed judicial court, they frequently exceed human cognitive capacities. Human beings are inherently limited. We have a processing speed limit, We get tired, we panic under fire, and we are subject to emotional volatility. We see the counter-narrative to this limitation in the recent data. For example, machine learning models have successfully identified hospitalized cancer patients who require palliative care far earlier and more accurately than traditional methods. In the military domain, defense systems, like missile defense networks, require reaction times to incoming threats that human neurobiology simply does not possess. Now, when we talk about the dilemma of AI, the conversation almost always hits a wall at the so-called responsibility gap. The idea that if an AI makes a fatal error, there is no single human to hold accountable. I see why that feels alarming, but I want to offer a different perspective. That concept is based on an outdated model of interpersonal ethics. By adopting what we call a Rawlsian distributed responsibility model, we can completely disaggregate accountability. We spread it across the designers, the commanders, and the civilian leadership. Using a veil of ignorance framework to structure these institutions, which we will definitely get into, we can maintain meaningful human control without sacrificing the immense life-saving capabilities of artificial intelligence.
Well, I come at it from a very different place. Delegating a life or death choice to a machine crosses an inviolable line. It fundamentally reduces human beings to mere data points in a terrifying process known as digital dehumanization. When we look at the sheer scale of expert consensus on this, the alarm bells aren't just ringing, they are deafening. We're talking about the Future of Life Institute's open letter, which was signed by over 34,000 people. And these aren't just casual observers. These are thousands of the world's leading AI and robotics researchers. The very people building these systems are issuing a stark warning. They argue that offensive autonomous weapons will become the Kalashnikovs of tomorrow.
Right, meaning cheap and ubiquitous.
Exactly. Meaning they will be incredibly cheap to mass produce, ideal for assassinations or subduing populations. We are standing on the precipice of the third revolution in warfare, right after gunpowder and nuclear arms. Furthermore, the idea that we can engineer meaningful human control as a safeguard is frankly an absolute illusion, primarily because of automation bias. Look at the UC Merced study conducted by Colin Holbrook. In a simulated lethal drone strike, human participants were given the final say on identifying a target. Even though the AI robot provided completely random, wildly unreliable advice, 2/3 of the participants allowed the machine to change their minds and execute the strike. To me, this proves conclusively that humans will overtrust artificial intelligence even when a human life is on the line.
I think we need to dive right into that UC Merced study because it is central to how we understand the human-machine dynamic. I don't deny the existence of automation bias. The study clearly demonstrates that individuals can be swayed by automated systems. But we have to look at this as a fundamental engineering and training challenge, not a permanent disqualifier for AI integration. The study highlights a critical vulnerability in how we currently interact with machines. If we look at the literature on ethical AI in practice, it explicitly notes that comprehensive training programs can drastically mitigate human over-reliance on automated systems.
Wait, let's pause on that for a second, because the psychological horror of the UC Merced study is exactly why training isn't enough. We aren't just talking about people being a little lazy and trusting a calculator here. The researchers explicitly primed these human subjects beforehand. They showed them graphic images of innocent civilians, including children, and the devastating aftermath of real drone strikes. The subjects wanted to do the right thing. They were highly motivated, emotionally and psychologically, to avoid harming civilians. Yet, in the heat of the simulation, 66% of the time they still deferred to the AI when it disagreed with them. A human-in-the-loop safeguard is functionally useless in high-stakes moments because our psychological default, especially under stress, is to assume the computer has processed data we haven't. It assumes the machine simply knows better.
But that is exactly my point about interface and training. In that specific simulation, the robot essentially just said, "I think I saw an enemy." It didn't provide a weighted, explainable rationale. It gave a conclusion without showing its work. That's where explainable AI, or XAI, comes into play. Systems like LIME, which stands for Local, Interpretable, Model-Agnostic Explanations, are designed to fix this exact interface problem. Instead of a black box that just says, "Target identified or high risk," you have an interface tailored to the user that explains why. It says, "I am flagging this because of variable X, Y, and Z." It forces the human to engage with the reasoning, which equips a judge or a military commander to apply appropriate skepticism.
That sounds great in theory, but let's look at the reality of how these systems are actually used when people are under pressure. Let's transition to the justice system because we see the exact same over-reliance there. Even with systems that claim to offer a rationale, state and federal courts are massively underfunded and overburdened. That creates immense pressure on judges to utilize AI tools like the Compass risk assessment software to streamline their workloads. And the result is the State versus Loomis case in Wisconsin, which is a glaring red flag for this entire debate.
Yeah, Loomis is a tough case.
It is. Eric Loomis was sentenced partly based on a proprietary risk assessment score that he could not even examine or challenge. The algorithm used opaque factors, and while the creators might say, well, it doesn't explicitly use race, we know for a fact these systems use zip codes. Because neighborhoods in the United States are often historically segregated, an algorithm using a zip code is essentially using race by proxy, even if it claims to be colorblind. This completely masks implicit bias behind a veneer of algorithmic objectivity. The judge looks at the high-risk score, assumes the machine did the complex math, and defers to it.
I acknowledge that the Loomis case heavily exposes the dangers of black box algorithms. Transparency is absolutely essential, and I am not defending proprietary systems that hide their metrics from the defense. But again, the solution isn't to ban AI from the courtroom. The solution is open, explainable algorithms. If we demand transparency, we can ensure that operators only trust the system when it is contextually appropriate. We cannot throw away the predictive power of these tools, which can also highlight and correct human judicial bias, by the way, just because our current interface paradigms are immature.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are consistently treating this as a user interface problem or a training issue, but it is a fundamental moral problem. Let's shift our focus to the core concept of digital dehumanization, especially on the battlefield. Think about autonomous weapons, like the STM Kargu-2 loitering munition, which a UN panel reported was used in Libya, or the Kubla used in Ukraine. These drones do not see human beings. They process data acquired from sensors. They look at heat signatures, weight, and movement patterns, and they fit that data against a generalized target profile. If the profile matches, the system applies lethal force. Think about what that actually means on the ground. This completely strips the victim of their human dignity. It violates the core ethical principles we built society on. Whether you look at Kant's imperative to never treat a human merely as a means to an end or basic human rights frameworks, the principle is the same. A machine cannot exercise doubt. It cannot question itself. It cannot look at a target and recognize shared humanity.
I hear what you're saying, but my concern isn't the abstract philosophical categorization of the machine. It's the tangible, life-saving precision that the machine offers. Precision itself is a moral imperative. You brought up human dignity, so let's look at the medical field, specifically palliative care. We have new data on machine learning models evaluating electronic health records for advanced cancer patients, and the results are staggering. We're talking about an 86% accuracy rate in predicting early mortality risk. Instead of an abstract statistical curve, think about what that means in a hospital. An 86% success rate in identifying which patients desperately need palliative care before their suffering becomes unmanageable. By synthesizing vast amounts of data, this AI ensures that patients who need symptom relief and emotional support get referred early. Alleviating physical and spiritual suffering through timely intervention is profoundly respectful of human dignity. Yes, the communication of that data requires a human touch. Hybrid care models are ideal, but without the AI, those patients slip through the cracks of an overburdened medical system.
You make a fair point about the value of early detection, but we cannot ignore how these medical algorithms actually interact with real, diverse populations. AI lacks empathy and cultural nuance, which is critical in end-of-life care. When AI models are trained on Western bioethical datasets, they frequently push for aggressive, immediate advanced care planning. But what happens when that system is applied to a patient from a non-Western background? In many cultures, family-centered decision-making and the gradual, gentle disclosure of terminal truth are the cultural norms. An AI coldly predicting a 12-month mortality risk to force an immediate end-of-life conversation is deeply offensive and culturally insensitive. It's algorithmic blunt force trauma.
And that is why the human doctor delivers the news, not a tablet screen. The AI flags the risk. The human navigates the cultural nuance. It's the same principle in the military context. AI can process complex, multi-spectrum environments faster than humanly possible. Human cognition under the extreme stress of a firefight is heavily flawed. Humans panic, they misidentify targets out of fear, they seek revenge, and they commit atrocities. An AI operates strictly within its trained parameters. If the parameters are rigidly defined to adhere to international humanitarian law, an autonomous system could theoretically reduce civilian casualties drastically compared to a terrified human soldier.
That assumes the parameters perfectly capture the chaos of a war zone, which is impossible. But let's follow your logic. Let's say it operates strictly on parameters, and it makes a mistake, because it will. This brings us directly to the responsibility gap, which is the black hole at the center of your argument. If an AI causes a fatal medical failure or it commits what would otherwise be a war crime, there is no moral agent to hold accountable. AI does not possess intentionality or consciousness. It cannot understand the right reasons for an action. The United Nations Secretary General explicitly called lethal autonomous weapons morally repugnant for this exact reason. In his new Agenda for Peace, he called for a legally binding instrument to prohibit weapons that function without human control. Think about it practically. If a machine kills the wrong person, who goes to jail? The software developer sitting in Silicon Valley? The commanding officer who was 10 miles away and didn't even push a button? The procurement official? When no one is directly responsible, accountability vanishes, and the rules of war and medical ethics completely dissolve.
I agree that the traditional model of accountability breaks down here, but that is precisely why we must completely reframe our concept of responsibility. The problem isn't the AI. The problem is that we are trying to apply a 20th century model of interpersonal ethics to 21st century technology. Instead of pointing the finger at one single soldier on the ground, we have to spread the legal and moral weight across the whole chain. This is the Rawlsian distributed responsibility model I mentioned earlier. Think about philosopher John Rawls's concept of the veil of ignorance. Imagine you are designing the military rules of engagement from scratch, but you don't know who you'll end up being in this system. You could be the tech CEO coding the drone, the general ordering the strike, or the civilian living in the target zone. How would you distribute accountability? You wouldn't put it all on one person.
You would apply civil liability and massive financial penalties to the corporate developer. You would apply severe career consequences to the procurement officer who authorized an inadequately tested system. You place strict operational limits on the soldier deploying it. By distributing responsibility, you force the system itself to enforce safety. The consultants who wargame these systems would suddenly have a massive vested interest in writing airtight civilian protection protocols into the core code.
I understand the theory, but a distributed corporate liability matrix completely fails to satisfy the moral purposes of meaningful human control. If a civilian loses a family member to an autonomous drone strike, telling them that a tech executive in another hemisphere received a civil fine doesn't provide justice. It doesn't restore dignity. Victims of lethal force or victims of algorithmic medical denial have a fundamental right to have their lives weighed by a human conscience. Legal responsibility and moral responsibility are not the same thing. You can legally structure corporate liability all day long, but it doesn't change the fact that a human life was extinguished by an algorithm matching heat signatures. Furthermore, anyone who has worked in or studied massive bureaucracies knows that distributed responsibility usually results in no responsibility. It becomes a bureaucratic shell game where everyone just points the finger at someone else's department. It wasn't my code. It wasn't my deployment strategy. The stakes are simply too high to experiment with abstract political philosophy while machines are given the power of life and death.
To summarize my position in light of our discussion today, I fully acknowledge that artificial intelligence brings undeniable, profound risks. We have thoroughly discussed the psychological reality of automation bias, the very real dangers of implicit proxies like zip codes lurking within training data, and the cultural blind spots that can arise in medical contexts. However, completely banning AI in life-or-death scenarios is a reactionary measure that abandons its immense, proven potential. We are talking about technology capable of processing incomprehensible amounts of complex data, identifying critical medical interventions earlier than the best human doctors, and operating with a speed and precision that could drastically reduce human error in the most chaotic environments on Earth. We cannot regulate away human fallibility. Humans will always panic, and humans will always make mistakes under pressure, but we can utilize technology to compensate for those flaws. With rigorous, role-specific training, explainable algorithms that demand user engagement rather than blind trust, and a distributed institutional framework that holds stakeholders accountable across the entire ecosystem, AI can elevate our most critical decisions and ultimately save lives.
And I maintain that the stakes are simply too high for integration. From the impending global AI arms race that the world's top artificial intelligence researchers are desperately warning us about, to the proven, simulated reality that human beings will blindly follow a random algorithm into a fatal mistake, the evidence points firmly toward prohibition. Artificial intelligence inherently lacks the moral reasoning, the emotional empathy, and the contextual awareness required for taking or extending human life. Digital dehumanization, the reduction of a complex human being to a matrix of data points and target profiles, is a feature of the technology, not a bug. It cannot be regulated away by corporate liability frameworks or software patches. When a life is on the line, it must only be weighed by a human conscience.
It is clear we both recognize that artificial intelligence is fundamentally and rapidly reshaping the landscapes of criminal justice, medicine, and military operations. There is no putting the genie back in the bottle. We also clearly agree that the current pace of technological implementation is vastly outpacing the necessary ethical frameworks, public accountability, and regulatory oversight required to manage it safely.
Absolutely. We are in total agreement that without immediate, decisive action, the risks highlighted by the United Nations, the scientific community, and legal scholars will only multiply. The technology is advancing much faster than our ability to comprehend its societal impact, let alone control it.
Understanding both the unprecedented capabilities and the profound limitations of artificial intelligence is vital as we navigate this new frontier. We won't declare a definitive winner today. These are complex, multifaceted issues that require ongoing scrutiny and rigorous debate. We leave it to you, the listener, to form your own conclusion.
Don't forget to drop down into the comments and let us know your thoughts on where the line should be drawn. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.